everybody. Welcome. We're just going to give folks a minute or two to join us. So thank you for being here. If you're just joining us, welcome. We are live on Facebook, so please let your friends know they can join the conversation. We'll be getting things started in just a few seconds as we give folks a minute or two to join us. Okay, let's see. I think we have, looks like about 17 participants. So welcome everybody. Glad you're here for our second Tuesday talk. And I think we'll probably go ahead and get started. So good afternoon. My name is Heather Peeler. I'm the President and CEO of ACT for Alexandria. And I'm just really delighted to be spending another afternoon with you. This is our second ACT Now Tuesday talk. And this is an opportunity for everyone to go into behind the scenes and learn a little bit more about how Alexandria's nonprofit organizations are supporting our community during the pandemic. So Leanne, can you advance to the next slide? So for those of you who are not familiar with ACT, we are Alexandria's community foundation, and we are just really honored to partner with the City of Alexandria on the ACT Now COVID-19 Response Fund. This response fund was established to provide immediate financial assistance to the nonprofit organizations that are helping our neighbors in need navigate this global pandemic. To date, we've raised more than $850,000 from the community. We have a very generous community here in Alexandria, and that's from over 800 people. So thank you all so much for supporting our community at this time. The ACT Now Fund has awarded $753 in grants to 74 Alexandrians. Most of the support has gone towards direct emergency services, so food and shelter, and other necessary supplies that families need as they, again, navigate this crisis. If you would like to contribute to the fund, if you haven't already, hopefully you can see the link on the screen. And for those of you who have already given, thank you again so much for all that you are doing at this time. Can we advance to the next slide, please? So today's conversation is focused on homelessness and housing. This has been something that has been a challenge for our community pre-COVID, and today we'll learn a little bit more about how the pandemic has had an impact on the housing needs of our community and how community organizations are responding. So today I'm just really excited to be able to have Shannon Steene from the Carpenter shelter and Lynn Thomas from Community Lodgings join us for an in-depth conversation. So for those of you who don't know Shannon and Lynn, I'll give a brief introduction, and then they will have a chance to tell you a little bit more about their organizations. So Shannon became the executive director of the Carpenter Shelter in May 2015. And since his arrival, he has helped organizations grow and develop, helped the Carpenter Shelter grow and develop innovative partnerships. Shannon has more than 20 years of experience working with homeless populations. And prior to Carpenter Shelter, Shannon served as the executive director of Good Shepherd Housing and Family Services. So he has a lot of experience in this arena. As I mentioned, Shannon is joined by Lynn Thomas. Lynn joined the Community Lodging team as its executive director in 2014. She has deep expertise in supportive housing management, and I think we'll learn a little bit more today about what that means. She's a certified housing counselor and holds a Master's of Human Services from Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. In addition, Lynn is currently the chair of the governing board of the Alexandria Partnership to Prevent and End Homelessness. And during her tenure at Community Lodgings, she's further established the organization as an anchor institution in the community. So I can't think of anyone better to have a conversation about housing and homelessness than Shannon and Lynn. So thank you both so much for joining us today. So as we Oh, great. As I get started, I'd like both of you to just give a brief introduction to your organizations. There may be a few people on the call who are not as familiar with what you do in the community. So Lynn, can you start first? Just tell us a little bit about Community Lodgings.
Sure. We're a nonprofit located in the city of Alexandria. We're located in the Arlandria area of the city. We were founded over 32 years ago with a mission to provide housing for homeless families and low-income families in the community. We've expanded our services to include community outreach, where we provide an out-of-time school program for over 150 kids daily. We provide a summer enrichment program, as well as we have transitional housing, where we provide housing for 6 homeless families at a time coming out of the shelter. We've been in the community, and as I said, our services have just expanded from housing to now we're we provide the entire continuum of services in the community, where you can go from being homeless to having your own affordable housing, all while getting job development services, budget mentoring, youth education, all right there within the community.
Great, thank you for that overview, Lynn. Shannon, would you like to introduce Carpenter Shelter to us, please?
Sure. So similar to what Lynn had said, you really need to go back about 30 years to the founding of the Carpenter Shelter, who is the widest array of services for people that are homeless in the city of Alexandria, all with our mission of trying to promote the sustainable independence of people that are homeless through shelter, some services, some education, and some advocacy. And so all told, more than 650 people every year receive some services and support from Carpenters. Our aim is to move them from homeless to housed.
Thank you so much for that, Shannon. And so let me just pause. I forgot to give a few of the housekeeping guidelines for folks. So if you have questions, we definitely want to hear from you. So please feel free to use the chat function in Zoom to let us know what your questions are, and we will definitely integrate those into the conversation. Also, if you are joining us on Facebook Live, don't hesitate to post your question in the comments on Facebook. And again, we will bring those into the conversation. So I hope everybody will participate and offer the questions that they have for Lynn and Shannon. So Lynn and Shannon, thank you so much for those introductions to your organizations and the work that you're doing. And I know housing is and homelessness, it's somewhat of a complex issue in terms of understanding the need and understanding the solutions. And Lynn, I know you mentioned that Community Lodgings provides transitional housing, and whereas Carpenter Shelter provides shelter. Can you both tell us a little bit about kind of the housing ecosystem, if you will? What does it look like when somebody, whether it's an individual or a family, first loses their home, and then what kind of opportunities are there to find a permanent place to live? So Shannon, maybe can you start?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in on that. And so Lynn's organization and my organization in many ways do very complementary things. I like to think of it in some ways as bookends, in that if Lynn and Community Lodgings are tremendously successful on the front end of things, they can keep people permanently housed, making sure that they are stable and not in need of homeless services. And so that's one of the bookends. Sometimes things still crumble and people really need additional assistance beyond what permanent housing can provide. And so maybe someone does need to come into shelter and receive some services and support in order to stabilize that housing crisis and then move them back to permanent housing. And so through that shelter stay, through some rapid rehousing services, sometimes on the back end, the other bookend is Lynn and their affordable housing as a means to make sure that people are stably housed after that. And so if you think along that continuum, Lynn's on the front end, she's on the back end of a homeless service system that is really dependent on and interplays with the housing arena of things. Lynn, what am I missing in that? How does that hit you?
You described it very well, and that partnership and how it works, where when you do have someone and you refer them to our transitional housing program, families are referred. We actually serve families in our transitional housing program. And just a brief overview, for sometimes we just use the term transitional, but people may not know what transitional means. Transitional is housing where you're allowed to stay up to 2 years in the housing program. We provide support services, so you're receiving case management, financial literacy, job development, or those services that you need to help you move on to self-sufficiency and independence. So transitional housing is a model that's been around for a long time, and it varies on how some people stay maybe 6 months, some people stay maybe up to 2 years. It really just depends on the individual, and we try to meet that individual where they are. So there is no one, you can't look at one person and say that's transitional, because everyone's situation is different.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both for that overview. It was very helpful to understand, and also to understand that housing is more than just a roof over somebody's head, that it really does require additional supports and things to help people get back on their feet and stabilize, as you mentioned. So Lynn, I'm curious, in light of the COVID pandemic, what are you seeing in terms of some of the transitional housing needs and the kinds of supports that the families have that the families need that you're supporting through Community Lodgings?
Right. So our families, we have 6 families in our transitional housing program, and all have been impacted in some way, where we've had we had 2 who actually stopped working for various reasons. One was had a baby, a young baby at home. Another had a compromised immune system, and we suggested that she stop working. She was an elderly person, and we did not want her catching public transportation, and we just didn't want to have her risk being exposed. So we suggested that she stop working, with the understanding that we knew we would have to provide full financial support to them and their families, and we were willing to do that just to help the families. So we found that families had reduced income. We found that families had no income. We found the challenge of moms now having to homeschool their kids and still having to work maybe part-time, or now being assigned working at home. So we've been working with those families through a series of just working with them through workshops, virtual workshops. They're still meeting with their budget mentors, virtual. We have one client who was in the process of buying a home, which would have been a great major milestone for us. Well, it all was put on hold when the pandemic hit, but now she's back. She's just taking her first time home buyer classes virtual. So we've just seen that the reduction in income and the need for more services, but of course, being the PPEs, which is hard to find for us. So it's even harder to find for the families who have limited income and resources.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think it helps just to make the implications of the pandemic a little bit more real when we hear how it affects people's day-to-day lives. And Shannon, from the perspective of Carpenter Shelter, what impact has COVID-19 had on the clients that you work with, and on your services, and how you've been able to meet their needs?
Yeah, great question. And I chuckled at the outset because what went through my mind is what hasn't been affected by COVID-19 as this goes forward. You know, on a good day, Carpenter Shelter has 60 people in our year-round shelter. We've got a day shelter for the chronically homeless. And when it first started, we had our winter hypothermia shelter going as well, which means an additional 50 people can come in overnight just to make sure that they're in from the elements. That's a lot of people in one small geographic space. And so as soon as you start hearing the drumbeat about the importance of social distancing and making sure that you maintain 6 feet from each other, we physically didn't have the infrastructure to implement that. And so things like the precautions of a lot of hand washing, a lot of encouraging people to wear masks, not touch your face, do the hand sanitizing and all of that. We implemented as much as we could, but people were still in a very tight, confined space. And so then started what felt like a parade of changes in how we delivered our service to always keep our eyes on how can we better meet the spirit and intent of some of that social distancing. And so with time, we ended up moving all of our families out of our shelter into a long-term stay hotel in partnership with the city of Alexandria. That helped give them space to be separate from everyone else that was in shelter. Soon we moved single females out of shelter as well. When you're in shelter as a single, it's usually 6 people to a room. 6 people to 1 room, 3 sets of bunk beds is not in any way social distance. And so by the time all was said and done, we had suddenly 2 singles in a room in order to give them the space in order to spread out. The last thing that we really dealt with, which was a huge change for us, was to partner with the city and stand up a completely different temporary shelter. It's at the Charles Houston Recreation Center, about a block from the Wythe Street Post Office. And it's a safety shelter. It's meant to give people that are chronically homeless a place that they can stay at home in adherence to the governor's stay-at-home orders. And so all of that were the direct programmatic changes. And most markedly for us, we have 1,200 volunteers a year. And when these changes started, we also suspended all in-shelter volunteerism, just trying to limit the flow of people in and out. So I think of COVID-19 as sort of the great disruptor. There was not really one aspect of what we did that wasn't altered in some way, shape, or form. And it's been rigorous, and I'm super proud of our team, our board, our volunteers, our staff, but it's also been wearing to just think about what's the next way in which we need to be different in order to make sure that our residents have the best chance of being as safe and exercise the precaution that's needed.
Thank you. And I want to remind everybody who's joining us that if you'd like to ask a question of Shannon and Lynn, you can post a question if you're in the Zoom meeting via the chat function, or if you're joining us on Facebook, to post a question as a comment.
And Heather, I'd just like to add, in addition to the 6 transitional housing units, we have 45 units of 38 units of affordable housing, which houses over 200 individuals. And so in addition to working with our transitional housing clients, we're now working with our affordable housing families in ways that we didn't work before. Affordable housing families didn't come to us for food, didn't come to us for rental assistance or things that they're now coming to us for. So that's almost tripled in the caseload, if you call it that, in terms of the number of individuals that we're serving and just trying to find those additional resources for those families.
Well, it sounds like both you and your organizations have had to be pretty flexible and adaptive in meeting the needs of the community. Lynn, can you tell us a little bit about what you used funds from the Act Now Fund to do?
Absolutely. We've used one of the first grants that we got was from ACT was for the census, the mini census grant. And it came at a perfect time because we then used that census grant, the grant, to leverage the need to get the census information for the city. So anyone who completed the census, staff worked with the community, received a $50 Visa gift card. And as of today, I think we've given out over 30 Visa gift cards. And so that information, completing the census, is definitely vital to the community. But we've also used the Act Now Fund to provide produce and dairy food boxes. We've do it probably about every 2 or 3 weeks to about 56 families. So we've provided produce boxes. We've also secured some PPEs where we provided some PPE to 36 families living at one of the communities that we partner with, where some of the kids who come to our program live in that community. So we've been able to just provide food, PPEs, and just the necessarily gift cards so that people can get the basic things that they need.
And I'm happy to jump in,
Sure.
Heather. We're grateful at the Carpenter Shelter for the support from the COVID-19 Fund at ACT. For us, when we suspended all of our in-shelter volunteerism, that meant that our staff were working as they had in ways in which they had never worked during the history of our organization. We've always been so volunteer intensive and driven, and suddenly there weren't the volunteers. And so not only did we ask staff to do different things, we also shifted the times that we were asking them to work, moving to 12-hour shifts so that there were fewer people coming in and out of the building, really trying to meet that, how do we limit the flow of people? And so we started paying a shift differential, recognizing that in honor of the risk that they were taking on coming into the shelter, the fact that we were asking them to work markedly longer shifts, we did pay a shift differential, which was the heart of what that was. In addition, we did incur some personal protective equipment costs, some PPE costs as well, in order to make sure that people were safe, not only for our staff, but also for the residents, making sure that there was access to the masks, the hand sanitizer. We deputized everyone in the shelter, whether you're staff or residents, as a wipe down warrior. So there was plenty of wiping going on, making sure that frequently touched surfaces received regular attention multiple times a day. So that's the sort of the array of where we had pulled things.
Well, I think it's interesting that both Carpenter Shelter and Community Lodgings had significant needs for PPE. I'm imagining that was not a budget line item when you were working on your budgets at the beginning of the year. And so just want to highlight that that's how the Act Now Fund for COVID response has really been instrumental to not just your organizations, but so many others who have needed to purchase some of these unanticipated supplies.
Right.
We have a couple of questions from the chat. And so, Shannon, someone has asked about the upcoming winter season. And you've already talked about the partnership with the city and how you've been able to help transition some families into hotels and creating kind of more shelter space. But what are you anticipating for the upcoming cold season?
Yeah, so great question. We are taking a look, in some ways this gives us a whole new definition of what success might need to look like heading forward, which is previously it was just we need to bring people in and make sure that they're not exposed to the elements. Suddenly you need to do that, and you need to consider what's the distance and the personal safety in a different fashion. And so we are examining with new eyes what our physical infrastructure is like. We're also building a new facility we hope to be in this fall, and that had already been planned. It was under construction when all of this hit, and so now it's with those new eyes that we're looking at our space. We have some long-standing partners. Alfred Street Baptist Church and the Church of St. Clement have both been phenomenal winter shelter partners with us for the duration that we've been doing winter shelter. And so we envision that we will want to continue there. We haven't had that conversation with them yet as far as what the next winter shelter season looks like. But I think space is going to be viewed in a much different way than it has been historically. So I wish I had firm answers. This is what we're going to do, and it's going to start on this particular date, but that's a very active discussion topic at this point.
Well, knowing you, Shannon, and your team, I'm sure you will come up with some creative, innovative solutions. I look forward to learning about those. Lynn, there's a question for you from the chat, or somebody is asking about the summer And I think we all understand the impact that the school closures have had on some of the learning and educational needs of children. Can you talk about what you're seeing with your families, and then also what, if any, summer programming or summer support for the children that you serve that you're anticipating?
Right. Right now, we're still figuring out, we're looking at and following the CDC guidelines on summer camp, and that we just had a conversation yesterday, Tuesday, my staff, yesterday was Tuesday, use track of days. And we talked a little about summer camp and what that would look like for us. In the past, we've served over 75 kids. We know that that's not a reality this summer. So we talked a little about pivoting our program and that we would be limiting the number of kids that we serve. But then we talked about how do you select that number when there's such a need for these types of programs. So we're really just in the early stages. We're definitely thinking and talking about it and know that there's a need for it, but we're still trying to figure out how we go about accomplishing this much needed service, but still being able to stay safe for not only the staff, but the kids and the entire community. So we're in the early stages of talking about it, but it's still, it's the possibility.
Thanks for sharing that. And it does sound like the COVID pandemic has really changed your cost structure as an organization in so many ways, from summer camps to all the other services and supports that you provide. Another question here from the chat. Have either of you had any residents test positive for COVID-19? And if so, how have you dealt with it? Or if no one has yet tested positive, how do you anticipate dealing with it?
Sure.
Lynn, do you want to? Oh, sorry.
No. I'm happy to jump in there on that one. I am thrilled to report that at the Carpenter shelter, we have not yet had a resident that has tested positive. We have had residents that have been tested and that needed to be quarantined while they were waiting for their test results, which is a whole, already we have more people under the roof than we're really should be having in that sense. And so finding some isolation space was a challenge in that sense. We did have a room that we had quarantined off for them that did have separate bathroom and shower facilities for them. So we felt very fortunate to be having that particular space. When you are in a congregate living setting, that it was disorienting for the residents, the staff. We're certainly nervous about what that meant. Anytime you need to bring them food or something along that ilk to don, complete PPE, it's very sobering in order to go through that. It helps you realize the potential that a positive test can have to affect someone's health. And so normally our measure of sheltering is we can bring people in and make sure that they have a safe place. But when safe has such a different meaning, that I think was really sobering for everyone on our team, including the residents.
And we have not had any known knowledge of anyone that's test positive in our properties. However, if you may have seen it this past Saturday, we teamed up with Neighborhood Health to provide over 200 tests to that community we serve. Our community has been identified as a hotspot, and so we teamed up with Neighborhood Health to provide those testing. We have not gotten any information back yet in terms of what the results are, but we have worked with some families not in our property, but in the surrounding community that we serve who've tested positive. So we've been in constant contact with the family, as well as making sure they're connected with the health department and the resources they need to get food and PPE. So we're just, we're waiting and we're keeping our fingers crossed. Yes, Shannon.
So yeah, let me jump in on that, Lynn. So you are in the hotspot of where there are more positive tests in the city of Alexandria than other parts of the community. From your lens, sort of what has been the biggest surprise? What have you learned about that particular community as part of this? Are there any things that have sort of bubbled to the top with your perspective there?
So I've actually learned resilience with the community because we're working remote, but we do have some strong community leaders who say, Lynn, you get the food boxes here. We'll make sure the families get it. You get the bread here. So we don't always have to come into the office, although we do have office staff who come in, but they particularly handle the maintenance and the cleaning. But those day-to-day, I'll give you an example. We had, and we, as you mentioned, there are no office hours for us anymore. I got an email late Friday night saying, hey, we have 150 lunch food boxes that we can give you. Can you use them? Well, who's going to turn down 150 food at 9:30 at night? So I said, sure, give me a minute. So I started calling, texting and emailing staff. And we finally, after 10 o'clock, we got through, and then we reached out to our great community leader and I said, can they deliver the food to you? And will you make sure it gets distributed? And he says, yes. So I say resilience in that the community, the people there, they're resilient. They're prideful, when we talk and we say, what do you want? What do you need? It's not, I need food, I need this. It's always, I need help paying my rent. They realize and understand and appreciate that having a roof over your head is a solid foundation. And I say to them, if you can pay your rent, if you can find it, I can help you find food. I can help you find other things. But finding affordable housing in this times is very hard.
I think that is spot on with our experience. What we've seen, there's the immediate of how do you shelter people? Mm-hmm. How do you make sure that their immediate need is met? But really that long-term solution is access to permanent housing. And so for us, success looks like we move people from homeless to housed. That is ground to a slow crawl at best, if not a screeching halt, as the flow of people exiting shelter. And so it feels like we're building up this bubble within our service system. Mm-hmm. And so I think the nut to crack is how do we move people through that bubble in order to mix a whole bunch of metaphors together?
Yes.
And so you've got governor's orders, stay at home, but you still need people to be looking for permanent housing, but their access to get out and about is impeded. And so just figuring out how do we view this, where is there good, honest, and sincere effort being applied? And then what do you see as actual results in that process? And so it can be terribly frustrating. You see people doing everything right, and so much of this is just contextual. This is not unique to the people being served by the Carpenter shelter or community lodgings.
Right. And that's why when I mentioned earlier, it's more now than just our transitional. We're working with affordable housing people and on some of those challenges. We're working with people who've worked 10, 15, 20 years who've never needed any resources, who are now finding themselves having to stand in food lines, having to apply for services, and they don't know how or just can't figure it out. And so we've now stepped in that role to help those families, like I say, who've never come into our office to ask for anything, but who are now saying, where do I go? Where do I turn? How do I manage this?
Right.
I think what's interesting is both of you are talking about kind of the need for the immediate emergency response, but also a need for us to concurrently be thinking about the whole system and long-term thinking, because the needs of our community are going to evolve over time. It's not just getting rental assistance or emergency food to people right now, but thinking about what are people going to need 6 months from now, 10 months from now, and how the organizations in our community are prepared to respond. So I think that's been really helpful insight to hear that from both of you. One thing I'm curious about is, and Lynn, you mentioned being inspired by the resiliency of community members. Can you maybe share a personal story in how the COVID pandemic has had an impact on you and your leadership?
Sure. So prior to, I would consider myself an extrovert. everyone would consider me an extrovert. Just, I thought I was an extrovert. But COVID-19 has taught me that I am such an introvert. I work well by myself, not surrounded. I thrive off of adversity. So it's just, for as much as it seemed like getting an email at 9:30 at night about some food, I was excited to be able to know that, oh, we can, we're helping. So I think I found that, one, I'm not that extrovert that I thought I was. And that just looking at my staff, I knew when this first started, as I mentioned, we have the out-of-time school program. So we serve 150 kids. So you can imagine they work after school with kids. So sitting down and talking with them and saying, okay, what can you do working at home? I needed to be able to sustain them and say, what can you do working at home? Well, they were amazing in the things that they came up with. And then we never realized that this was going to evolve even bigger. So now, like I said, they're doing more case management. They're doing more troubleshooting. They're doing more just trying to identify resources. So I found that I don't have to work as hard or just smarter, because I'm surrounded around brilliant, great team. I have a great board and just the whole leadership around me. And so it's just, I don't have to take on everything.
I totally resonate with your pride and I guess confidence that you have in your team. I definitely have that with the team that I work with at ACT, as well as our board. So I definitely share that appreciation. Thanks, Lynn. Shannon, how about for you? What's a personal story or insight? Have you learned that you are also an introvert?
So I'm not telling tales out of school because Lynn is on this Zoom with me, but Lynn and I have worked together for many years. Yes. Lynn, I think contextually you are in a very rough spot, as is everyone right now. And I think you're still an extrovert in that sense. I would agree with Lynn that there are times when I think of myself as a raging extrovert, and there are times when I would just come home from the shelter and I wanted to close the door, and I was actually thrilled that I couldn't go to the grocery, I didn't need to go to church or run errands or any of that, because it was just tired. But the real realization for me has been, historically, I would think I run the Carpenter shelter. I run a nonprofit human service that works with people that are homeless. And as this pandemic has unfolded, I think more and more of what I do is I lead a community. And that community has several different audiences within it. I look at the response that has come from our residents as one of the communities. I look at our volunteers and our financial supporters, and they're wanting to check in, and our residents asking how our volunteers are doing because they miss them. It's starting to see that when you pull an element out and you have to operate in a different fashion, you really start to see how you're all part of a larger system. And so I don't think of myself anymore as just running the Carpenter shelter. I think of myself as a leader of a community in that sense. And it's beautiful. It's a little bit wearing to sometimes think about that when that hasn't been your frame of reference previously, but that's what I've been doing some journaling about lately, is trying to sort of put some meat hooks into that and have that frame of reference.
As Shannon mentioned, Shannon and I have worked together in other jurisdictions, other settings for years. And so I remember when the pandemic first started, and Shannon and I had a conversation just on managing staff during this time. And he gave me some really good information and some suggestions on how to manage staff during this time. And so I appreciate it. I do, reach out to Shannon and kind of look at him as like a mentor, and what about this? And how does this happen? And right. And what happens? But Shannon, tell me what's been one of your biggest challenges during this COVID-19.
On the front end, the first thing that I was worried about, and actually, Heather, I think you were one of the first to hear this publicly, we're here in the old Macy's at the Landmark Mall. and we don't have a commercial kitchen. And so when the initial drumbeat of you get a positive case and everyone needs to self-isolate for 14 days, and you have 60 people under the roof and no kitchen facilities, like that was terrifying to me. And to know we needed to figure out how to program around that reality. And so very quickly, we started getting out word to our supporters. We've always had volunteer groups from the community that have provided food to us. They have shown us a level of love and a level of responsiveness that has been unbelievable. We are so grateful for the communities stepping forward and saying, you don't need to worry about food. We've got you handled in that capacity. Actually, what we've learned from them is when so many things societally have been taken away from them as far as liberties, knowing, hey, I've got a purpose, there is something I can do to help someone else in this context, we actually are hearing more positive feedback for their ability to be involved with our work and our mission. And I just find that beautiful. But huge challenge on the front end.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think the challenge you highlighted also speaks to another question that came up in the chat here, where folks were curious about how you are making time for self-care. So finding, again, that inspiration and beauty, as you were saying, in the people that you work with and that you support and serve sounds like a great way to bring gratitude into your day. Shannon, you mentioned journaling. What else are both of you doing in terms of caring for yourselves as leaders during this time?
I was never an outdoor person. So now I'm finding I have a yard. So I've been trying to do some landscaping and gardening, things that, again, would have never happened had this not come about. So I find myself just sitting outside, looking at the trees. I read a lot and just enjoying finally my space, my home, and just love to pick weeds. And now I'm excited about just going around the yard, picking weeds and saying, oh, this is a new one. This is a different one. Where before I didn't. I never had time.
Yeah.
Gardening, great hobby.
Exactly. Yeah, for me, I think that a lot of the self-care has been surprising because I do think of myself in a typical context as a raging extrovert and just appreciating the ability to be alone in quiet. You know, sometimes it's my partner and the dog and I, and that feels wonderful to just not have, you know, and so you find a way to sort of cocoon and just live in the silence for a little bit. And I appreciate that more than I think I ever have.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing so much about your work and then also your personal lives. We are coming close to the end of our time together. I can't believe it. It's flown by. Before we wrap up, I want to share a few announcements about upcoming programs, but we do want to conclude with any final thoughts from either of you, either a point of inspiration or just something you want to leave all the attendees with. So I'll give you a minute to think about that while I just share some upcoming programming announcements. So we do, as I mentioned, this is the second of our Act Now Tuesday Talks. We have several coming up in June. So the next one will be on health, and it will be facilitated by a former board chair, Lauren Stack, and she will be speaking with Dr. Rena Bonsall from Inova Alexandria Hospital and Dr. Bastian Khan from Neighborhood Health. So I think that'll be a really informative conversation. Then on June 16th, racial equity, I'll be joined by Jacqueline Tucker from the City of Alexandria and Evelyn Urita from Tenants and Workers United. And then finally in June, we'll have a session on early care and education moderated by Lisa Guernsey from New America, and she'll be joined by Tammy Mann from the Campagna Center and Michelle Smith-Howard from Smart Beginnings Alexandria. If you have thoughts about programs or topics that you would like to see, just put those in the chat, let us know, or send a note to me and Brandy. We would love to hear your ideas. The other thing I wanted to let folks know about, and Leanne, if you can advance to the next slide, is Good Works Alexandria. This is an opportunity next week for all of us to both support small businesses in our community and support the nonprofits in our community. So if you shop or dine at a participating Alexandria business, mention your favorite nonprofit at the checkout, and the business will donate a percentage of sales to the organization that you identified. So you can find a list of participating businesses at the website that's listed here from the oldtownbusiness.org, and then also a list of the nonprofits that are participating by visiting springtoaction.org. So that's it with my announcements. Let's go back to Shannon and Lynn, and what would you like to leave us with?
Lynn?
Well, to the students, the youth that we serve, I would just like to say, don't give up. Continue. We're here for you. We support you. We had the pleasure of treating 16 of our youth who made honor roll or who improved to pizza last Friday, thanks to Topper's Pizza for a joint partnership. So we want to just tell the kids, don't give up, to continue to strive. We're here for you. We're a phone call away, a text message away. And then just to the community, we're one. We'll get through this. Together at heart, even though we're apart, we're definitely here from you, and we will all get through this.
Yeah, I want to pile on to that last sentiment that Lynn gave. I feel like I've got one of the best seats in the house for seeing the generosity of this community. And for me, we definitely are a community. And so I encourage everyone, just watch out for each other, take care of one another, and wash your hands.
Great. Thank you both so much. And our community is just so fortunate to have both of you as leaders. Thank you for what you do for Alexandria every day. We really appreciate it. And thank you to all who have joined us here today. Thank you for all the support and love that you're also sharing for our community. This concludes our Tuesday Talk today. Thanks, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.